This is Mona Tanchev, President of NCSM, and welcome to Learning with Leaders, the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. Join me as I sit down and have conversations with emerging and established leaders exploring equity in action. You will hear from bold mathematics leaders as they share their experiences and actions and what they have learned from them. We think these next few minutes will help you consider the bold actions that you can take to focus on equity and support those that you serve. Grab a warm cup of coffee and a journal as we learn together on our mathematics leadership journey. Hello, I'm Mona Tanchev. Welcome to the NCSM podcast, Learning with Leaders. John Sangiovanni and I are the co-hosts for the Bold Mathematics Leadership Series. To finish up the Bold Leadership Series, we have invited speakers to sit down with us and discuss what equity means to them and share with us their experiences and stories of leadership actions that support our journey as mathematics leaders. We have with us today Dr. Timothy Kanold. Dr. Kanold is an educator, husband, father, runner, author, and inspirational speaker. He is a nationally recognized K-12 mathematics educator and leader from Illinois, where he also served as school district superintendent. Dr. Kanold is also a past president of NCSM, and he has co-authored mathematics textbooks for Houghton Mifflin Harcourt and several other books, including the 2018 IPPY Award winning book, and IPPY stands for Independent Publisher Book Award. The book was titled Heart, Fully Forming Your Professional Teaching and Leading Life. His follow-up book that was released this February is titled Soul, Fulfilling the Promise of Your Professional Life as a Teacher and Leader, a professional wellness and self-reflection resource for educators at every grade level. Dr. Kanold is also the recipient of the 2010 Damon Award for Outstanding Leadership Contributions to the Field of Education, and he is the 2017 Ross Taylor Glenn Gilbert National Mathematics Leadership Award recipient. And most importantly, he is a fantastic mentor and friend, and we are honored that he can join us today. So welcome, Tim.
Thanks so much, Mona and John. And it's really my privilege to be in this podcast with you today. I'm excited.
Well, thanks for joining us. So we've been asking all of our invitees the question at the very beginning around what does equity mean to you?
Yeah, obviously that's a really broad-based question, but I was reflecting on that. I think somewhere maybe on my Twitter profile or something, I say something about I'm an equity eraser. And I can't really tell you why, but I know very early on, I grew up in Chicago, and I even grew up in an era where depending on what high school you were in or at, like if we were visiting for track and field, the black athletes had to sit separate from the white athletes. There were black hallways and white hallways. I mean, that's an era I grew up in. And there was something, even in my first teaching job, when I went to a rural school and then ended up being in a very urban school, my second job, and eventually a suburban job. In all of those settings, rural, urban, and suburban, I encountered almost what I would call invisible inequities and no one addressing them. And it just seems strange to me that in our profession, especially math education, that there wasn't this intentionality about pursuing where do the inequities exist in our school curriculum, where do they exist in how we provide students access and opportunity, and even where do they exist because teachers make their own individual decisions, and those decisions destroy student learning for the next grade level or the next year. And because we're saddled with being a vertically connected curriculum, we can't afford for that. I think it's why I've spent my entire life really passionately pursuing the PLC process, as we understand it, PLC at work, as it was developed in my district, because I wanted to make the grain size of change and decision-making change the teacher team, so that we could be pretty guaranteed that students would come to the next grade level equitably prepared. Even answering the simple question, what do we want every child to know and be able to do, and meaning it. The guaranteed and viable curriculum means it's guaranteed and viable for every child in third grade, not just every child who might get, one of us as their teacher. And so I think that idea of beginning to erase inequities by eliminating the noise of the independent nature of our work and working together around best practice, I think really began my equity journey. And then I think it matured as I got older in terms of realizing, that not only do you have to go after those inequities, but even understanding how students learn and sort of this do we really get to teach mathematics any way we want to? Well, no, actually we don't. We don't have we have what I would call a moral responsibility to actually teach and make moves in the classroom that we know beyond a shadow of a doubt have a significant impact on student learning. And so if we know those things, I would consider it malpractice not to do them. So the role of the math education leader is to say, we're not going to allow all this inequity in the rigor of our curriculum and the rigor of the tasks that we ask kids to do and the rigor of the assessments we give, or even as simple as the practice that we give students to do, because we're going to work together to do that around what we know is the best practice, not only in the nature of what we have students experience, but also the process in which they learn it. So I think that's part of equity for me is bringing that kind of common ground and expectations. People have asked me, Tim, have you ever required teachers to do anything, math teachers do anything as a math ed leader? And my answer is not really, but I've expected them to. I've expected them my entire life to actually behave in ways that advance student learning. And if they don't have evidence of that, then it's my responsibility. Hopefully you do it with grace, but it's my responsibility to call attention to the inequity that they're creating, even if it's unintentional, and in terms of how students learn. So that's part of it, certainly, and then there's also the social justice end of it, some of which we control and some of which we don't, but I do think that when we take seriously, how do we help every child learn, then what we have to do is learn about the whole child and where they're coming from, what their backgrounds are, how they understand or see things, how they even see words. My colleague Luis Cruz has actually begun to say that, ESL students should really be looked on as gifted and not as students, that are in need of additional support in the sense of we're going to track them into their own classes and so on, because they can actually speak 2 languages. They're learning to speak 2 languages. So, isn't that the very definition of someone who is considered advanced? So I think it's looking at the way we do things and challenging ourselves to think about, do we really provide access to all students? So I know that's a long answer to that question, but I really feel that, as math education leaders, we have a responsibility to root out any inequities we see taking place in terms of either how we're creating a classroom of validation, all the way to our kids even getting access to the best mathematics curriculum we offer.
Tim, that's such great insight and perspective. It gets me excited to learn more from you. And thinking of excitement, NCSM is excited to have you as a major speaker for NCSM's 53rd annual conference in Atlanta. Thinking about the conference, what is something about the conference that you look forward to?
Yeah, John, I was thinking about, I'm so glad you're asking this question, because I just want to tell everybody. So my first NCSM conference was 1983. And it was in Detroit, Michigan. And I was a math teacher, a high school math teacher, and my department chair, a guy named Lee Yunker, who was actually on the NCSM board at the time, said, Tim, you're coming to the meeting with me. We're driving to Detroit. And I'm like, okay, I don't even know what NCSM is. I'm not a math leader. I'm just in the classroom. I'm a coach. I'm just trying to survive life, making no money. I mean, it was just a really difficult time in my life that way. And I'll never forget, 5 of us pile into his car and we drive to Detroit. And here, this is the best part of what I love about the meetings, because I think even as a past president of NCSM, I was very aware of the power of the connections that occur because people come to the meetings, the power of being with people who understand. I remember it's like, oh my gosh, they have the same problems I have. They're dealing with the same stuff I'm dealing with. Someone actually understands, the frustrations I have and the joy too, But so we get to this first meeting and I'm kind of feeling like I really don't belong. And guess who's president of NCSM in 1983? It was Shirley Fry. And so Lee was kind of a Montana guy. He was kind of, I don't know, he was in Chicago. We're in an urban area of Chicago, and yet here he was, kind of this Western cowboy dude, big guy. And he says, we're going to this country Western bar. And so we go to the bar and we're all just sitting there and having a beer or whatever. And this woman comes up to me and says, would you like to dance? And so I get into a line dance with her, and she seems really nice. And a little bit older than me, quite a bit actually at the time. I'm like 31 or 32 at the time, so she seemed really older to me. And when the dance gets done, she's like, so tell me who you are. You're here with Lee Yunker, right? And I said, yeah. And my name's Tim Kanold. And she said, well, I'm Shirley Fry. It's so nice to meet you. And that was it. That was the whole conversation. I get home 2 weeks later, I get a card in the mail from Shirley Fry, president of NCSM, this kind of in my head, this god of math education, right? Then this was before she even became president of NCTM. And it was a card just saying, it was so nice to meet you at the NCSM meeting. I really feel, I just wish you the best in your math journey. And, I was stunned by that. One, she even remembered my name. And two, she took the time to send me a personal handwritten card, and somehow I had to get my home address, probably got it from Lee or something, and this was before email, so this was not like, and it taught me a lesson, because I remember hearing that from Shirley, that getting that card and saying, I must do the same. If I ever have a chance someday to be a math education leader, I'm going to pay that forward. I'm going to make sure that I'm noticing people who are coming up in the next generation and urging them along, as appropriate. And so, I think that's what NCSM, that's what the annual conference does for us. And so one, it's the connections, but two, I think really the opportunity to learn. Because I don't think of a time I've ever been at an NCSM conference personally, and I've been at all of them since '83, that, there hasn't been significant people ahead of me that I've been able to learn from. And so, I think that's what I love about it. Yeah.
Oh, Tim, that's such a great answer. I love it. And you read my mind, thinking about seeing old friends, making new friends, learning together and having some fun together. That is just a great perspective. Thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can attest to his sort of paying it forward, because so that was at what, you said 1983?
Yeah.
In 2004, I sat across a table in Phoenix Union High School District, and you told my boss she has to go to NCSM. So my first conference was in 2004 as a brand new math leader. So you definitely honored Shirley Fry, and you paid it forward there. So thank you.
Yeah, that's pretty funny that I actually went to your boss, Jean, and told her.
Yep.
You have to send her.
By myself across country, had never traveled like that, but it changed my life. So thank you.
Cool. You're welcome.
We're headed to Atlanta. So your session is titled Attending to the Heart and Soul of Your Leadership Life. So give us a sneak peek into your session, and possibly what are some of the takeaways a participant might have?
Yeah, I think I've learned so much since I wrote Heart. And when I wanted to write up a follow-up book, I think the iconic phrase heart and soul, and as math ed leaders, what is the importance of leading with our heart and soul? Even, obviously it takes a certain amount of academic and intellectual knowledge about our field to be able to lead people forward. But ultimately, I think as a leader, people really remember you for how you helped build into them and, move them forward. So in this session, it's all new. It's brand new. I've never given this. In fact, this will be the first time I'll deliver it. We'll be at NCSM in Atlanta. And it's really built on sort of some new brain research and neuroscience research that I walked through as I was over the last 2.5 years writing the follow-up book. So one of the things I discovered is the critical impact on, believe it or not, mirror neurons, and how students tend to mirror the teacher's emotional mood, the place that they're in emotionally that day. And if we're in an emotionally good place, more pleasant emotions, you might think of it that way, then students are more likely to engage in the work that you're asking them to do mathematically. However, if we're engaged in perhaps difficult responses to anger or fear or various kinds of anxiety, or even being scared, all those things, even sadness, if we're anchored in that in front of our students and we're not having a positive emotional response in front of them, actually it shuts down their cognition. So there's quite a bit of brain research evidence of this. It's things that I learned about doing that. And so one of the things we're going to do in this session is we're going to look at some great strategies for, I don't want to give give them away, but we're going to look at some great strategies because I want them to come to this session.
Right.
But we're going to look at some really great strategies for, I think, bringing your best emotional self to school every day, no matter what else is going on and the obstacles going on in your life in the background, either your professional or personal life. And let's face it, we have just had a year of emotional exhaustion. And I think a lot of us are in a place of emotional exhaustion. And I think one of the things that this session will do is, one, lift you out of that place a little bit, but two, give you some really concrete strategies for not going to that place, for, when we're recognizing when it's happening and then doing something about it. And here are some great routines you can try, and I think it'll provide that. And in the beginning, I've always felt that it's really not a session directly tied to mathematics that way. But because our organization is for mathematics education leaders, we have a responsibility to steward a culture like that in our area of influence. And so my hope is that one of the primary takeaways is this will not only help you, but it'll also help those that you're leading, so that you can recognize and maybe create a culture or structures that will help them respond in a way that's healthy for their students and for them. Yeah, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, I look forward to it. And clearly you're not going to give away any spoilers. So
not too many. I might give away one before we're done.
All right, we're going to try and get one out of you along the way, Tim. But thinking about your session description asks this question: is math teaching and leading your vocation or merely your career? And we suspect many might have a sense of what you're speaking to, but tell us, what do you mean? Hopefully it's not a spoiler. And how do you see math leadership as something more than a career?
Yeah, so I'll tease it, and I have a really good story for it, but I'm using that story in the talk. So
okay,
and by the way, Steve Leinwan's involved in the story. So
that's
anybody that knows Steve Leinwan, they should come for that reason alone. But seriously, so there's this concept of your first mountain climb and your second mountain climb in your professional life. And I think that a lot of us that end up going into the math education leadership realm, in the beginning, we may do it because we see it as a first mountain climb. In other words, first mountain climb is, what's the profession doing for me? And so it's kind of self-centered. It's sort of, it doesn't mean it's bad, but it's like, well, what awards am I winning? Or am I getting any recognition? Or am I serving as president of an organization? Or do I get to be on this team? Or do I? And so it's very much like a feeling, it's about achievement, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not fulfilling. It will never last. In fact, every single achievement you get will still leave you empty. And then there's this idea or this thought about a second mountain climb. And in the second mountain climb, instead of standing in front of a mirror and saying, what is my math leadership life all about? And saying, well, it's all about advancing me, it becomes, and what's the profession doing for me? It becomes, what is the profession asking from me? And so I can even remember with great clarity when I made the decision to, for example, to be considered as NCSM president. I really, at the time, probably didn't really have the time to do it, but I felt this clear kind of leaning that the profession was asking me to run. And if it worked, fine. And if it didn't work, fine. I mean, I would live with the pathway no matter what it was. But sometimes I think when we decide is it our vocation, it's like we make this decision that I have no choice but to do these things with my life. I am a math educator and I am a math education leader. And this is just how I'm wired up. And even when it gets tough, it doesn't matter because this is who I am. And I have no choice but to take on this role, these roles in our schools, in our districts, or in an organization or whatever. So, to me, that's the difference between a career and a vocation. A career is about health benefits and achievements and awards and money and all that. And those might be important. But vocation is about, this is your calling in so many words.
Yeah, so I love the idea of the vocation versus the career, because I understand the calling piece and what it means to serve others. You don't go into it for the notoriety, you go into it for the passion, right? You go into it because it's something that you just strongly believe in and that you want to be. It's so strong in your beliefs that you just want to be a part of it.
Mona, I think it's like there's a second tier of otherness. So we are in a profession of others. We, as math teachers, we are here to serve the K-12 growth of our students. But when you decide to wear the math ed leadership mantle, you have to be in it for others, because you've decided I'm going to lead other adults. I'm going to do the best I can to understand how different adults learn, and they don't all learn the same way. And now I'm in this kind of second tier of influence because they're also leading their students. So you don't feel it perhaps quite as strongly, but I do believe that if we fail to see it as an otherness profession, like it's then we're failing to find the full fulfillment of what our vocation is Latin for voice. So of what our voice is, I think that, and people, and that has to be sincere. I don't think you can be inauthentic with that. But everybody when I talk about this topic, I think those for which this is their voice, they totally, connect in, which is great to see.
So in your book, Soul Story, you speak about creating moments of vulnerability, but often we as leaders think of those as just moments that just happen or occur. So tell us more about this vulnerability loop and how you can create them and view vulnerability as a strength.
Yeah, so I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert too. So in my session, I'm going to talk about which comes first, vulnerability or trust. And so do I have to trust you in order to be vulnerable with you, or do I become vulnerable with you first and then trust develops? And the neuroscience on this is crystal clear. So I'm going to give the answer here so people will know ahead of time. But the answer is really clear. Vulnerability precedes trust. And that surprises a lot of people. It even surprised me a little bit. And yet the more I thought about it, the more I realized that the power of vulnerability is not in the person who asks for help, but it's in the receiver and what they do next. And so this will be something for us as leaders to really think about. But basically, our profession, I don't get it quite, because, if you're a doctor, if you go to see your doctor and I don't know, your arm's dangling around or something, it's like, yeah, I don't really know what that is, but I got an arm specialist I can send you to, right? They immediately admit right up front, they're not an expert in that. But I know one that is, and I'll send you to that. And in our profession, we don't tend to do that. It's like somehow we're just supposed to have all the answers all the time to everything, really? Like, who put that mantle on us? And so to me, what I'm hoping is what I think this is all about is, first of all, can we lead a culture in which vulnerability is a strength? So I think our first job in this issue is to say, I'm going to lead a culture where vulnerability becomes a strength and no longer viewed as a weakness. Vulnerability will be a strength. We are going to be vulnerable with one another, which simply means we're going to ask each other for help. It's that simple. I'm not sure about how to use this technology. Can you please help me? I know you've already showed me 4 times, but I'm still not sure. Can you please help me? And what's really important is that when you ask for help, and what the leader has to watch for is, how does the recipient that was being asked for help respond? Because if I'm in a team meeting and I say, hey, could you really help me with that? I'm not quite sure how this fits in, into the story arc for our unit 4 on fractions. Could you give me some help with that? Admitting, even though I'm a 12-year veteran, I'm still not sure about it, right? Or whatever. And your answer is, Tim, how can you not know that? We've been teaching this every year for 3 years. You're such an idiot, right? Well, I will never be vulnerable with you again. So as leaders, we can't be tolerant of that. We have to teach the recipient has all the power. And if you think about even your own personal life, when you're vulnerable with someone you're really close to, your spouse, your partner, you're a really close friend, you are giving them the power to hurt you. And it's no different than at work. When I'm vulnerable and because I don't want to give people the power to hurt me because of how they might respond, we have to create a culture where responses are so appropriate and grace-filled that we go like, yeah. And what I understand from the research is that the best response the recipient can give when I say, hey, could you help me with this, is first of all to acknowledge, wow, Tim's asking me for help. And when the leader asks for help, that begins to model it. because I think math, when we're the leaders of our departments or our curriculum in our school districts, or we're the leaders in the instructional coach or whatever, people tend to look at us as like, oh, they sort of have all the answers, they got it all figured out. But when we ask for help, we begin to model that vulnerability loop. But then the key is for me, for whoever's listening, to say, oh, okay, they're asking for help. So then they respond with something like, I've had that same problem before. Let me show you what I do. And it's just that simple. It's no more or less, or you know what, here's what I do, but I know Joe, or he's got a better answer. Maybe we should both go talk to Joe. You're right. So it's that kind of thing. Vulnerability loops are basically these loops of asking for help, responding appropriately through the giving of help, and then and that creates this establishment of trust. And over time, we become more vulnerable with one another because we know we're not, I've told you guys about, I have this thing where I'll put my hands above my head at a team meeting and I'll ask for the umbrella of mercy. And I'll just be like, I know you guys are going to want to jump all over this, but let me just say what I want to say. And then when I'm done, I'll ask you and invite you for your help and your feedback. And I think that's a very powerful way for us as leaders to communicate. And also it tells people, slow down a little bit, just hear out the whole idea before you just tell me all the things that are wrong with it. So that's all it is. I mean, it's that simple, but it's complex in terms of its deliverables.
I was gonna say it sounds simple, but it's not easy to do. Right?
It does sound simple.
It does sound simple, but yeah, I just wanted to echo some of your comments about the vulnerability piece, because the framework for leadership in math education that came out in April of 2020, one of the guiding principles is the empower principle, which what you're describing is if you can engage in those vulnerability loops and build a deeper level of trust, you're empowering those that you serve. And that's what you're going to be striving for, building that collective efficacy, which we know is important to do on any education team. So thank you for adding that part to the story.
Yeah.
Thanks. So I have one last question for you, Tim, that is personally, it's just a selfish question, but I think all of our leaders want to hear about it as well. And that is, as we look forward to a new school year starting next fall, and one that is probably unlike any other, what's one piece of advice that you might give a math leader as they prepare for the next school year?
Yeah, and John, it's funny because I'm asking that same question of a lot of people this summer at our different events and so on. I think for me, this might sound a little trite, just because I'm thinking about how I would, for myself personally. But I think one of the things that I'm very aware of is that whole analogy about, when the airplane is going down, put the mask on yourself first before you put it on your child. And I would say my best advice for math ed leaders as they walk into August is to make sure they're taking care of themselves. That they're taking some time for themselves so that they are in a really healthy place every single day at work. They're able to stay balanced, I think, emotionally, and truly be there, because you can't be there for others if you're all wrapped up in your own stuff. So you have to be, I think, making sure they're doing things outside of the school day, whether it's amount of sleep or rest, or the foods they're eating, or the nature of their movement, just getting some kind of movement into, so any kind of physical habits, but also even their decision making, their balancing out their life with some off time so that they can be fully available for everybody when they're at work. I think those are things that are important. But also, I would say, to me, the most urgent thing is, how are you leading people through the curriculum and this kind of year of where I'm just hoping we don't try to cram everything in. I think the best thing we can do to help teachers this year is with their unit plans and giving them permission to take certain stuff out, pass that information along to the next grade level or next course, and just feel like you don't have to make up everything that happened last year, year and a half in 1 year, and yet having a really clear plan that they discuss with the folks they're leading, so that we can see the big picture. So being able to paint the big picture, to me, would be really important more so than anything else, for this coming year. And planning this summer to get it done, really thinking through how they're going to deliver that message and who do they need to work with and who, et cetera, to get ready for that. The only other thing I'd say, if there's any chance to get any of your units revised and developed for at least the first 6 weeks of next year and get it done this summer, I would do it, if they can. But I think that's going to be, if you don't answer critical question 1 that we call it, what do you want every child to know and be able to do, then everything else goes out the window. So that question has to be really crystal clear. We have a saying that clarity precedes competence. So we can't expect students to be competent in the math curriculum for that grade level or course if we aren't crystal clear on exactly what the standards are we want students to learn. So I just feel like that needs to be really honed in on for next year. Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. That's perfect.
It's really good advice. So just a little sneak peek to the podcast listeners. NCSM is co-authoring a paper with NCTM as well as ASSM this summer. It's called right now Continuing to Move Forward, but that might change. And it's a follow-up to our document from last summer, the Moving Forward document. And in there, Tim, there are specific actions around how to appropriately scaffold and support. Because if we're not doing that, if we're not attending to the fact that students did learn this last year, it's our job to figure out what their strengths are when they come into the classroom and how to move them forward. We are doing ourselves a disservice as well as our students. So you'll get to read that as long as with everybody else in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. I think one of the things that I've always felt is that, even in my own leadership, was that, I would have a tendency to come into the school year and I'd be focusing on 3 or 4 different major initiatives. And James McGregor Burns says to have more than one initiative is to have too many. And so Rick DeFore, my boss, sort of taught me how to just really have one major initiative that you're drilling deep on, that you think has the highest benefit in terms of student learning in that year. It doesn't mean there aren't some other things going on around you, but, really saying, okay, this is what I'm just going to be passionately pursuing this year in order to make sure we're getting our students back on track as best we can. And that includes answering the question, I think, for people who aren't quite sure about, so what happens if we do still have, that question, that very singular question of the guaranteed and viable curriculum for this year in every grade level and course, it does include all the other stuff, like, well, what technology would be used or wouldn't be used, it's all of that too, but it's really going to be your singular focus that every team's going to have to answer and respond to, every single one. And if I was a principal, this would be happening across the board in every subject area. I wouldn't even hesitate, like this, every department, every grade level, every team that I have in the building would have to be showing me how they're responding to their revised unit planning work. And in our discipline, man, it's so important, as we've already talked about.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Tim. I appreciate you being a guest on the podcast, and it was just an honor to talk to you. And of course, you are my friend, so it's an added bonus.
She's a little biased, but let me say that it was a pleasure to spend time with you, Tim, and I'm sure the listeners will agree.
You're awesome, John. Thanks, Mona. You guys, I just can't wait. I'm like you, I'm sure, because you guys are going through it more at the organizational leadership level, but I cannot wait to actually be back in Atlanta and see also many of our friends and just be back together again with our group. It's just been too long and pretty messy, but I think we're getting on the other side of it. So
yeah,
absolutely. We agree. Concur.
We agree. Concur.
All right. Thank you.
All right. You guys have a great summer.
We hope you have been inspired by this bold mathematics leadership conversation and will tune into our podcast series each month. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and a review. You can learn more about NCSM, Leadership in Mathematics Education, and our upcoming professional learning events on the NCSM website at mathedleadership.org. You can also follow NCSM on Twitter at mathedleaders using the hashtag NCSMBold. Thanks again.